we have someone there to provide protection for us. In the Army, it's a chaplain's assistant. I think it's that in the Air Force as well, but I'm not sure. In the Navy, they're called religious program specialists, or RPs for short. And I had a wonderful RP. And during the midst of that, we were caught one time in a firefight, and he did save my life. And he was one of the most quiet guys I'd ever met in my life. But that day, he found his big boy voice, and we came under fire, and he literally grabbed me by my protective gear in the front and spun me and threw me underneath a truck just as a surge of machine gun bullets went by. And He saved my life.
Marcus Aurelius said, "What we do in life echoes through eternity." What is your life echoing through eternity? Welcome to Echoes Through Eternity with Dr. Jeffrey Skinner. Our mission is to inspire, engage, and encourage leaders from across the globe to plant missional churches and be servant leaders. So join us and hear the stories of servant leaders reverberating lives as God echoes them through eternity. Brought to you by Missional Church Planting and Leadership Development and Dynamic Church Planting International.
Welcome into Echoes Through Eternity. I am your host, Dr. Jeffrey D. Skinner. I am joined in the studio today by Reverend Larry Brant. Made that mistake again. Brant, and he is a lieutenant commander with the Navy Hospital Twin Palms, California. He's a chaplain there and has been serving the Navy for 14 years. And I'll let him tell you a little bit about yourself. Just want to remind you that if you are listening, if you enjoy this, we'd appreciate you giving us a nice little review on wherever you're listening to it, Spotify, Apple Podcast, wherever. And then like it and subscribe. That way you get up to date. We have a variety of leaders that we interview on here. We're just trying to amplify the voices of those that are doing kingdom work out there. Welcome in, Larry. It is great to have you here today. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You have a great story.
All right. Well, I am 59 years old, or I will be 59 this year. I've been a Navy chaplain for the last 14 years. I'm originally from the Midwest, grew up in St. Louis area. And I've been married to my beautiful bride, Tammy. We'll be married for 37 years this coming June. We have 3 adult children and 2 grandchildren. And as I told you earlier, I grew up in the church, 3rd generation Southern Baptist, was very active in the youth ministry and missions ministry in our church growing up, felt God's call to go into the ministry, specifically as an associate pastor doing worship and youth education. And that's pretty much what I had trained for and did that for about 25 years. And then in my last church in Nebraska, I was at a wonderful church called Southview Baptist Church in Lincoln, Nebraska. And while I was there, some of the members approached me who were policemen and firefighters, and they said, we think you have a really good temperament to be a chaplain for the city. Would you consider that? And I prayed about it, and I liked the idea about it, and went to the senior pastor, and I said, is this something you have an issue with? And he blessed me and said, go forth, do great things. And I did that for the next 8-9 years. And eventually began running the ministry for the city of Lincoln, Nebraska. And we had about 30 volunteer chaplains that I worked with and supervised. And during that time, towards the end of it, I went to a denominational training. And at that denominational training, really began to feel God's call to military chaplaincy and tried to tell God all of the reasons why he was wrong. Kind of like Moses at the burning bush. And, when you know it, every reason I came up with, God had a counter and a better answer, I told God, I don't have the right master's degree. At the very next session, they started talking about online accredited degrees. And then I told God, well, God, I'm too old, because already past that time, I was already past the point of the age to be able to come into the Navy. Again, the very next session, they started talking about how the Navy and the Army were doing age waivers because they were in need of good chaplains. And I really thought I had God on the third one. And I said, God, I'm just too big a boy, because at that point in time, I weighed over 300 pounds. And God answered back, there's this thing called a diet and exercise. And and so I said, okay, and I'll do this, God, if this is your will, but I really need you to tell my wife because I'm too scared to do that. And she was with me at the conference, and we went back to the hotel room that evening. I'd been thinking all day how I was going to rock this woman's world with how her husband wants to just, run off and do this thing. And I was rehearsing in my head how I was going to break this news to her. And we get to the room, and I close the door, and she spins me around, puts her finger in my face, and said, I think God's calling you to military chaplaincy. And I was like, wow, he really did tell her first. And that was just another confirmation of that call. And so over the next 18 months after that, that was in 2007. Over the next 18 months, I went back to school, got my Master of Divinity, lost 110 pounds, and got an age waiver, and came in fall of 2009. And it's not easy, but it's been extremely wonderful and rewarding.
Wow, that is a great testimony, Larry, and I resemble your story in that you resisted that call and needed God to talk to your wife. That has when I was called into church planting, I was running a IT business, and I told the Lord, I said, if this is your will, you got to talk to my wife as well, and she's the one that told me. Yeah, it's amazing how the Lord does, he doesn't work in isolation. He really does. That's one of the things that I tell the people that I coach in church planting is if you're not called, don't do this. Number two, the way to discern your call is if God is not talking to your spouse also, he's probably not calling you. And even if he is and your spouse is not willing, you don't do this
I
because,
completely agree.
it's hard, and the last thing you need is an unwilling spouse, whether you're doing chaplaincy or whether you're doing church planting, especially military chaplaincy, because while it's not intentionally placing you in harm's way, the fact remains that you do combat tours sometimes and you're placed in harm's way. So tell us a little bit about that. You and I were talking just a little bit before that you do serve and have served in combat situations. One was Afghanistan. And talk to us how that works in chaplaincy.
Well, in my situation, when I came in, one of the first things they did was they sent me to the Marine Corps because the detailer, the person who makes the assignments about where we go, he joked with me and said, we need to put you with the Marine infantry first, because if you ever go to them while you're any older, they just might kill you. And I was like, okay. And that's where I went. My first tour was with 2nd Marine Division at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. The things that I got to do while I was with 2nd Marine Division, I was a chaplain with 3 different battalions, with the 2nd Assault Amphibian Battalion, and that's the Marine craft that launches from the ships and goes to shore, with the Tank Battalion, which the Marines no longer have. And then in between those, I was assigned to 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines, which is a Marine infantry battalion, which has since become decommissioned. And uh, initially, we were going on a deployment on what's called a MU, a Marine Expeditionary Unit, where that's about 2,500 Marines from various units load up on 3 Navy ships, and they deploy around the world, and they're the President's 911. They also do joint training with friendly countries. And in the midst of that deployment, that was, the end of 2010, when General Petraeus was pushing for the surge. And as a part of that surge, we were literally taken off the boat and flown into Afghanistan for a combat mission. And we were there for about 6 months. And when a chaplain goes into combat, because we are non-combatants, no matter what service we're with, we have someone there to provide protection for us. In the Army, it's a chaplain's assistant. I think it's that in the Air Force as well, but I'm not sure. In the Navy, they're called religious program specialists, or RPs for short. And I had a wonderful RP. And during the midst of that, we were caught one time in a firefight, and he did save my life. And he was one of the most quiet guys I'd ever met in my life. But that day, he found his big boy voice, and we came under fire, and he literally grabbed me by my protective gear in the front and spun me and threw me underneath a truck just as a surge of machine gun bullets went by. And he saved my life.
Nothing like a near-death experience to place an exclamation point on your call, right?
Right. And to be honest with you, I also told a friend of mine that I will never fear another deacons meeting again.
There you go. Christian leaders everywhere are talking about Revitalize to Plant. Written by Drs. Desmond Barrett and Jeffrey D. Skinner, Revitalize to Plant is more than a philosophical approach to church planting and revitalization. The authors have experienced the crucible of leading in the trenches of ministry. It's gritty, practical, and most of all, recasts our vision and understanding of church planting and revitalization. Revitalize to Plant, now available on Amazon or revitalizetoplant.com. That's revitalizetoplant.com, the last resource you'll need to bring new life to your church. I was about to say, in church planting, I have certainly had my attacks, but never through bullets or IEDs, and the attacks that we face there are nothing like. At least so far, I've not had anybody threaten me with physical violence or bullets or anything like that. So yeah, me too. I am definitely not up for dying young, and especially not up for dying a painful death, right? I want to go out in my sleep like probably most people do. So I want to talk to you a little bit about you. You do a lot of counseling as a chaplain there. And so you and I talked a little bit when someone comes in to talk with you, of course, you serve all religious faiths. You don't just serve Christian faith. They do have imams and people for, if you're Catholic, they have a Catholic chaplain. You're specifically a Christian chaplain. But there are times, I'm sure, where you are, end up having to counsel, minister to someone who's not of the Christian faith. Talk to me a little bit how you navigate that, and then I want to get into a little bit deeper of the counseling side of things that you face in the military situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Navy chaplains have basically 4 competencies that we, for lack of a better term, live and die by. And they're called facilitate, provide, care, and advise. And kind of what you're talking about is in the facilitation aspect is that we uphold the First Amendment and guard it tenaciously so that people can practice the faith that they believe, no matter what that may be. Because I would want someone to guard that for me. And so if somebody comes to me and has a particular question about a particular faith, or they practice a particular faith and they want an answer from somebody who practices that faith, then I'll connect them to a chaplain or a religious leader of that particular faith. And that's called facilitation. And we'll connect them with another chaplain on the base who may practice that particular, or maybe a religious leader in the area. The second is I provide. As a Christian chaplain, as a Protestant chaplain, as a Southern Baptist chaplain, I will provide Bible studies. Sometimes I'm a guest speaker in worship services in the area. Sometimes in the church that I go to in the town here, I'll fill the pulpit if my pastor has to be out of town. When we deploy, I do worship services. Protestant-style worship services is what I lead. Whether it's in the field or on a ship or what that may be. And the C is to provide care, and that is where the counseling comes in. And as a federal military chaplain, I'm not a mandatory reporter for anything. They can literally drop anything on my doorstep, and I'm not obligated to report on it. But what I will do is I will talk with the person. And if it's something that, such as suicide or homicidal ideations, I will partner with that person and until the point that they are willing to get the help that they need. I'll never leave someone just kind of hanging. But they can come to me about a lot of different things, whether it's relationships, maybe work environment, work stress. Sometimes it has absolutely nothing to do with religion at all. I've helped people find information on adoption, on getting a good lawyer. It's amazing the kind of things people will bring to the chaplain because they know I won't discuss it with anyone else. And then lastly is that, see, facilitate, provide, the advise. I'm sorry. Uh, Sometimes my brain goes blank. I apologize for that. In the advisement portion is where I advise leaders all the way from the command triad to the different director or department leaders and advise them on religion and culture, morale of the unit, ethics and morals, things like that. And so between those four competencies, I stay pretty busy.
I can imagine. So it is interesting. You said literally nothing. Now, my mother is a counselor. She has the same rules, except that she does have to mandatory report suicide if someone has suicidal ideation, and she has to report homicidal ideation. But you do not, right?
No, I do not.
That's interesting to hear. But did you are intentional in working with them and try to get them to where they're ready to seek help? That's good.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Well, I want to make a transition now because now my mother, she worked in a place called the Pastoral Institute in Columbus, Georgia, which is right there by Fort Benning. She did her residency and everything there. So she saw a lot of soldiers and she dealt with a lot of PTSD and there's things even beyond that. And I know you talk a lot about a moral or wound. And I'm sure you've seen it all in combat situations, working only with the military. Talk about one, I guess, the difference between PTSD or what a lot of people talk about as PTSD, but is actually a moral wound and what the difference is, and then kind of how you help people with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people are really don't know about, I call it PTSD's evil twin, and that's moral injury. We know that PTSD is something traumatic that happens to us and it affects us severely. It changes our life, and there are different things that can happen with that that they react to in a bad way. Um, but there's also a thing called moral injury, and moral injury is instead of something happening to us, moral injury is something that actually we do or we fail to prevent. And sometimes it's under the direction of somebody in authority over us. And it's so against our values, our morals, and our spiritual upbringing that it literally breaks us emotionally and spiritually. And the guilt and the shame of that just eats the person up alive. Now, sometimes a person can have PTSD and moral injury because, say, in a combat tour, obviously something happens to them. They come under fire, their lives are in danger. But there can also be the situation in which they do something or maybe fail to prevent something that they thought they could, and that just adds to the brokenness as well. And I remember, what you were saying in your last episode about how we are all broken, and that is most definitely true. But there's some levels of brokenness where in the area of moral injury, we feel like we're just infected with that sin that we did. And we withdraw from everything and everyone because we're afraid to infect others with that sin that we believe has consumed us because of what we did. For instance, the Marine who was on guard duty and he had to shoot the pregnant woman who was wearing the suicide vest. Now, he knows that that was what he had to do in order to protect his fellow Marines, but it's still the idea of taking the life of someone who was made in the image of God, and she was pregnant, carrying a child made in the image of God, and he had to end their lives. And that scene takes place just kind of constantly reminds in his head every single day, and he can't get past it. It's so traumatized him that he feels like he's no longer worthy of God's love, his family's love, his church's love, and he just backs away from everything. And it's not always combat related. We're finding out more and more as we study moral injury that it can be in other avenues as well. You've got first responder moral injury. Those police officers and firefighters who are in situations where they have to make hard decisions, or they aren't able to prevent something, and the scene of what they can't prevent breaks them. There's a brand new study out. It's a joint study from the VA, Vanderbilt University, and Duke University that compares the exposure to moral injury from combat veterans and healthcare workers during the pandemic. And the results of that study show that healthcare workers in the pandemic actually are pretty much evenly scaled as far as exposure to moral injury events to those combat veterans, because you had those healthcare workers who sometimes had to make the decision as who got the ventilator and who didn't in some situations across the country because there wasn't enough to go around. When I was doing my clinical pastoral education, or CPE for short, in San Diego, I did a residency at the Naval Hospital in San Diego, and I did a residency with the VA in that program, which is an outstanding program that the Navy has for continued education for chaplains. But it was part of at the height of the pandemic, and we were seeing people in the ICU pass away daily. And not because there wasn't enough equipment. Fortunately, the Naval Hospital was well equipped, but they just weren't able to stop the complications from the COVID and the people dying. And the nurses and the doctors and the corpsmen there were just devastated with watching those people die daily with almost no relief. And they felt like failures because they weren't able to prevent.
Wow. Do you want to grow and multiply your church? Perhaps you need help launching a new church, or even a Christian ministry like a coffee shop or something else. Do you find yourself struggling just to recruit volunteers week after week? Is your church in need of new life? Maybe you're fresh out of seminary and the organizational leadership called you with an opportunity, and you realize that opportunity needs a fresh start. Or perhaps you're a church planter. You've been going it alone for a while now, and you're exhausted, lonely, and doubting your call. We understand. Church planting, launching a new church is hard. Missional Leadership Coaching is here to help. Go to missionalleadershipcoaching.com and click on our free offer to get started today. That's missionalleadershipcoaching.com. We look forward to helping you. I guess the question would be, does all trauma result in PTSD, but not necessarily moral injury? Or is there sometimes that people could experience trauma, but not necessarily experience PTSD?
Sometimes people experience trauma and they have a higher level of resiliency than others.
Right.
Um, or sometimes it's one event and they can overcome the single event.
Mm-hmm.
But like in a combat situation or in an ICU situation, it's not just one event. It's an event. It's like the death by a thousand cuts, where it happens day after day after day after day. And after a while, that resiliency just wears down.
Yeah.
Um, but there are some people who go through that and their resiliency is high enough that they bounce back. They come back from that. A lot of that, quite frankly, has to do with faith, how they use their faith in their lives. But there are also people of faith who, again, a lot of these are those who have that situation where they're just constantly exposed to those events.
Mm-hmm.
Even that resiliency just wears down after a while.
And I can imagine from the chaplaincy standpoint, you're working with a soldier who's been traumatized and has the moral and injury and the PTSD. And I mean, it'd be difficult to get any progress because it's just constant re-traumatization and possibly even moral injury, right?
Absolutely. Now the good thing is there is a way. There are ways back from that. There's now things that we can do that can help companion with those folks and help bring them back. One of the projects that I had in CPE was I took a program that was doing very well in the VA and adapting it to active duty. And when I came here to this hospital, I went to my leadership and I said, I would very much like to try to do this program with active duty sailors and Marines so that we could try to head off maybe some things that happen when a person suffers from PTSD and moral injury. As you well know, a lot of things is their inhibitions go down.
Sure.
They're more prone to make bad decisions. They're more prone to lose close relationships, such as with their children, with their spouses, and uh, and they were all for it. And our first round that we did last fall, we saw a 10% reduction in PTSD symptoms in this program. And we're getting ready to launch a second one again. And we're looking forward to hopefully seeing the same kind of results or maybe even better.
That's awesome. That's incredible. Well, Larry, I have thoroughly enjoyed having you as a guest on the show. You've got a lot of wisdom. And I guess my last question for you, I can imagine as a chaplain in the military there's plenty bad to focus upon. But I would want to ask you, where are you seeing hope today? What are some of the most hopeful things that you see or one of the most rewarding aspects of being a chaplain in the military?
Oh, gosh. I see hope all the way around. I mean, I see young people who are willing to give of service to their country. I see people of very strong faith in the military and wanting to serve God and country. I see people from across various races, denominations, just from very different walks of life, willing to come together for a common cause and work for the betterment of each other in this country. And that's exciting to me to be able to talk to people on a daily basis from different faith backgrounds or no faith background and to discuss how faith helps our lives. That's just so exciting to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Well, Larry, we certainly appreciate your service to the country, service to the kingdom, for the kingdom, and just continued, blessings upon your journey there. And just may God continue to send people in your path that you can help heal and put on that path to healing there. We certainly need people like you. Thank you for obeying the Lord, even if it was at 45 when he calls you. It's a reminder that, like Moses, we don't control when God calls us or at what age. God is just concerned with that we have something that he can use and wants us to be a service for his kingdom to help bring about healing for his people, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And be honest with you, this is, I enjoyed my ministry before coming into the military, but I feel like all of that was in preparation for what God was having me do here. And it's just been an absolute joy.
It is amazing how our life, even some of the pain of our life, makes a lot more sense in a rearview mirror than it does when we're in the middle of it, right?
Very true. Very, very true.
Thank you, Larry. Again, blessings to you and have a fantastic day. All right.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Hey, thanks, Larry. I appreciate that. I want to remind everyone, too, that Revitalize to Plant, Reshaping the Established Church to Plant Churches is available on Amazon or anywhere, Whiffenstock, anywhere you want to buy books, Books A Million, or you can go to book.revitalizetoplant.com. And there you can get a discount on for $15. I think it lists for $19 on Amazon. But I'll even pay the shipping through the USPS, United States Postal Service. I'll pay the shipping if you want to purchase it directly from me. Again, that's $15. It doesn't matter either way. But revitalizetoplant.com. And you all, it's been great being here. I appreciate it. Like and subscribe, if you will. A lot of people listen to this. We get about 2,000 downloads per episode. We're in the top 17% of all podcasts, which is great. This is just a testimony to people wanting to hear the story of God, and all that is good. But I'd encourage you to subscribe and then share it with your friends, because the subscriber base is what will help us get these voices out there, right? I've told you this is not about me. It cost me money to produce this podcast. I paid over $1,000 last year just in podcast promotion, production, and the tools to edit. The hosting of the podcast is not free. All these things, I'd encourage you to please like and subscribe, if you will. Thanks a lot. You can be a co-creator with God by helping to echo our guest voices. Share our episodes with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Give us positive 5-star reviews. The more positive reviews we have, the more visibility we have, and the more voices that are echoed through eternity. We often invite guests who are serving faithfully year after year, often in anonymity in their respective roles in ministries. God sees them, and the reality is for a good kingdom leader, that's enough. We do not do what we do for the accolades of humanity. We do it because we're called by God. But I believe that God uses people like you and I to continue those reverberations and echo them throughout eternity. You can partner with God by liking, subscribing, writing a quick positive 5-star review, and again, sharing those voices with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Those reviews will eventually lead to other guests who have larger platforms that have more listeners, who will then in turn listen to the show. And again, it further echoes those voices, which is the whole vision of the Echoes Through Eternity podcast here, is to continue echoing those voices that God is echoing through eternity there. So like and subscribe and review us if you would. We'd appreciate that greatly.